point to, people like, Stalin and Trotsky and Chairman Mao, but they won't point to people like Tony Blair, that kind of thing, so it's like, it's almost like there's and then there's another problem too with psychiatry, because psychiatry fundamentally doesn't believe that there's such a thing as evil. They've reduced everything down to, chemical imbalances in the brain. That there's almost like they'll go to a lot of lengths to even sort of to deny that a psychopath exists. So it's a big mess out there, and that's why I think we need clarification on what the problem is, so we can properly identify it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Thomas.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Uranus Rising. And Thomas, we're going to move on to victim issues, and next up is Bluebell.
Hi, Thomas.
Hi, Bluebell.
Concerning victims and the roles that they play, personally, I have some experience in this, that I grew up in a family with a psychotic father and victim mother, well, psychopath father, and my mother always took the victim roles. And in this, I can see 4 areas that might keep someone in the victim role. If you're a victim, you deserve the attention and care. If you're a victim, you are always the good guy. If you're a victim, it's not your fault and you're not responsible. And if you're the victim, you have an instant bonding with other victims. So there are some perks to being a victim that makes it hard to step out of the victim role from the inside. Anyone who has been hurt must go through the phase of recognizing that hurt before moving on. Do you have any suggestions on how to avoid getting stuck in that hurt, or how to move into a life that includes joy?
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right about that. On some very primal level, there's always a symbiotic relationship between the psychopath and the abused, the target. It just is. Now, they get stuck. Some people get stuck in. It's almost like a lot of it is that they've been mind controlled into that situation. I mean, I've seen that in my own life as well. I've seen sensible people targeted by psychopaths, and basically they were just destroyed. They were just turned into a different person. In order to get out of that, it's going to be very difficult if they don't have any knowledge. Most people who spend long times with psychopaths, and I'm sure it's been the same in your family, they don't really know what they've been dealing with. And eventually they become almost like a doppelganger of the psychopath. Like if they have enough, like the psychopath drills enough sort of mind control into them, they actually start believing what the psychopath is saying is true. And they'll actually be almost like their unofficial representative in public and things like that. Like I've seen people who, we've all seen relationships where there was an abusive husband and a wife, or an other way around even, and they may have been a psychopath, and people are all saying, what the hell is she still doing with him? And the reasons you listed out right there are exactly why. They're as complex, and as human beings are still very strange and complex creatures, and that's exactly it. Now, you asked me about how would they break out of that. Is that what you said, the last part of the question?
Yeah, is how to avoid getting stuck in the pain of being with the psychopath. Because I've seen my mother, she can't see it. Like she's just so involved in that role of it's her personality now. It gets to be such an addiction almost of being the victim that they just can't step out of it.
Yeah, it's a horrific trap to not even so much for them, because they come to accept that human beings will accept the most appalling things imposed upon them if they think that's normal life, and they'll just accept it. It's fair. I just can't see how, other than people like yourself and others feeding them the information, and perhaps a light bulb moment will happen. That something will be described to them about the pathology, and suddenly a missing aspect in their lives that never made any sense suddenly happens, and then they become aware that this person that they're with is a psychopath. But otherwise, it's very, very difficult. If they're in long-term relationships with a psychopath, it's really difficult to get them out. Their psychological state is exactly the same as someone who's been trapped into a cult.
Yeah, I can definitely.
It's unfortunate, It's unfortunate, but all I would suggest doing is just keep feeding her information. Hopefully, the light bulb moment will come on.
Yes, I have a follow-up question here also.
Sure.
There is a well-known interpersonal dynamic between abuser, victim martyr, and savior hero. Sometimes it can take 3 people to fulfill the roles, but quite often 2 people fulfill the roles. For example, the abuser can also play savior, or the victim can try to play savior. These roles are interrelated and dependent upon one another for the dynamic to function. There cannot be an abuser if there isn't a victim, and there is no need for a savior if there is no victim. The most important aspect of stopping such a paradigm would be for the victim to step out of that dynamic, to stop identifying as a victim, or for that matter as a savior either. Or conversely, since these roles can flip, if one identifies oneself as a victim, they may be propelled by the very power of this dynamic to lash out in anger, thereby taking on the role of abuser. Also, one may discover they have been playing out the savior role, or the abuser begins to seek pity and take on the role of victim. How would you suggest people step out of this powerful dynamic completely? It's kind of almost a same question.
Yeah, and it's a very astute observation, because it's something I've been thinking a lot about lately too. I've actually been contacted by people who know they're in psychopathic relationships and yet refuse to leave the person because, as you says, they're enjoying it. There's a victim, there's a martyr complex there, and this is very bad. Now, yes, it's already said it's symbiotic on some level with these long-term relationships that are like that. And another thing you've reminded me of, then, I've often got messages from people who the mother, say the father was abusing the mother, but the mother couldn't abuse the father back, but she'd developed these proto-psychopathic traits and started to abuse the child instead, projecting it onto the child. So it's a disaster on so many levels. It's literally the only way out of it is to try and, I couldn't, for the children just to get away and have nothing to do anymore, but when they grow up, and for the spouse or the enabler who's in that position, I mean, I can't imagine how you could actually get them out, other than kidnapping them. You can't force a person against their will to change if they don't want to change. Some people don't want to change. That's a big problem as well. They're so locked into this false reality of themselves that they will take this abuse. I can't really suggest any way for someone to get out of that, because they're so deeply entrenched. One person I know did do it, and it happened because the psychopathic husband died. And then, believe it or not, a year or two later, they'd woken up. It's almost like they came out of the trance. And that's exactly what's happened, because they've been hypnotized.
Yeah, and it's like a comfort zone. They don't want to step out of it.
Yeah, and also their self-esteem has been destroyed by the psychopath. They've been, you've been told every day of your life, I'm the greatest guy in the world. You're lucky you married me. You'll start to believe it after a while. No one else will be as good to you as I am. That's what they do,
And that's funny, because my mother is actually the one in the relationship that is the narcissist, even though she's the victim. My father's retarded, and she's a genius. It's funny how they have slightly role switchings in between them. He's just straight out psychopath abuser. She's the victim, yet mind manipulator as well. It is funny to see. And
it's a very toxic situation. I'm sure when you go over there and you spend time with them and then you go home, I bet you feel like your energy has just been zapped right out of you.
Yeah, I've actually stopped communicating with them.
Yeah, and you know something, as harsh as this may sound, you've got to look after your own emotional state first, and that's the wise decision to do. You really can only save yourself at the end of the day. Yeah,
and I have kids too, so it was like, no toxic grandparents.
Yeah, no, you want to break that cycle now. Yeah.
One last question, going away a little bit from the interpersonal relationships and more into society. There's so many victims out there. Everybody is a victim of something, and the media is so not afraid to sensationalize the role of the victim. Sometimes the victim identifies with this role so much that the personal identity is lost or is unable to develop in a healthy manner. society based on religious principles uphold the martyr-victim mentality as well as the savior mentality and identify as a superior and in some ways something to strive for. How do we combat this type of mind manipulation?
Yeah, well, it's not only religion that's a problem there. Psychiatry is a huge problem. If you look at the DSM, the handbook of this, everybody on the earth has a problem. Like every human behavior is literally diagnosed as a disorder. 50 years ago there was like six real mental disease conditions, dysfunctionalities within the DSM or whatever they had at the time. Now there's something like nearly 600. So they're inventing new disorders all the time. And again, we're kind of back to what you were saying earlier on. It's very easy for someone to say, oh, it's not my fault. I have ZYED-SED-CC4. You know, that kind of thing. And this plays into this victim kind of thing. This sort of everyone is dysfunctional. And a lot of that comes from the sort of psychopathic control grid that's been with us since Babylon. It's a way to make people feel, and they're very successful at it. Well, they have been until like this sort of global awakening, to make people believe that they're completely useless on their own and they need to always externalize their own potential to a third party, whether it be priests, psychiatrists, Oprah Winfrey, New Age gurus. It's always been the same way, and that's a very deep and a very profound way we've been controlled for very, very long. People don't know how to actually think for themselves and look after themselves anymore. So that's the problem there. That's why these people all have a victim complex. But I do agree with you in a sense as well. It's also a comfort zone for many of them. It's easier to play victim than it is to be a hero. And that's really what's going on. So, and that's why also when somebody does sort of wake up and starts like seeing the world as it really is, that's also why the rest of them, the initial waking up period is so traumatic for the person, because they're ridiculed by all the people around them, because they're instinctually driven by the fact that don't wake us up from this dream we're very happy in.
Yeah, definitely.
Did I miss anything there?
No,
yeah,
thanks.
That's just a point I want to make quickly. That's what my work is ultimately about, so people can take the psychopathic experience in their own lives, and then when they've resolved and seen that, they can scale it then up to the actual the psychopathic control system. So the two things are like as above, so below. It's all part of this. It's all the same expression of the same pathological system that's been holding down the human race for so long.
Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you, Bluebell. Thomas, I wanted to know how you thought about how we create and manifest our own realities. I'm of the opinion that we do. And how do we have an awareness of the psychopaths and sociopaths that cross our own paths and maintain a balance so as not to attract those types of harmful energies and situations? And further, how do we remain empathetic without getting caught in an abuser-victim-savior dynamic role?
Well, absolutely, we do create our own reality, and anyone who says we don't is denying like the overwhelming scientific evidence out there. Absolutely, we do. Our underlying consciousness builds the brain we need in this life. That if we have an empathic consciousness, we will build an empathic brain that's fully developed in the prefrontal cortex and the limbic regions. And it will also, because those same parts of the brain that are also involved with creativity and dreaming, we will also be creative, dynamic, empathic, interesting, and see things in very deep and cognitive ways.